My phone vibrated against the polished dark wood of the console, a frantic, insistent buzz that I refused to acknowledge. The screen glowed with the words home and underneath, 23 missed calls. I kept my eyes fixed on the streams of data flowing across my monitors. My boss, Director Evans, a sharp man whose approval was earned in millimeters, gave me a curt nod. I keyed the microphone on my headset, my voice steady, betraying none of the history coiled in that single word on my phone. Director, the algorithmic tripwire on Jensen Innovations just fired. The offshore transfer protocol has been initiated. He didn't hesitate. You're certain? A ghost of a smile touched my lips. My analysis is certain. Initiate Protocol 7. Seize the assets. Just 3 days earlier, I was in a completely different world, one that felt a million miles away from this soundproofed room. It was my parents' 40th anniversary, held at a loud, gaudy restaurant that screamed of new money. My father, Richard, a self-made man who was pathologically obsessed with the appearance of success, held court at the head of the table. Standing beside him was my older sister, Claire, the family's golden child and the vice president of his company. She beamed, soaking in the attention like a flower turning to the sun, while I sat in my usual place. On the periphery, a quiet island in their chaotic sea of celebration. Claire eventually drifted over to me, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. Her smile never reached her eyes. "I'm surprised you came, Anna," she began, her voice a low murmur of practiced condescension. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress, so different from her own sequined armor. "You know, with your whole situation," she paused, letting the insult hang in the air between us. "Honestly, you don't belong here. This is for the family." The words were a familiar poison, a taste I'd known my whole life. But hearing them then felt sharper than ever. My eyes flickered past her pleadingly to my father. He saw me. He heard every syllable Claire had spoken. I know he did. His face was a perfect, impenetrable mask. For a heartbeat, the entire noisy room seemed to fall silent as I waited for him to defend me, to say anything at all. Instead, he deliberately, slowly, picked up his silver fork, pierced a piece of perfectly cooked steak, and brought it to his mouth. He chewed once, his gaze locked on mine, and in that single brutal action, he confirmed everything. He agreed. My father's silence was louder than a gunshot. He confirmed I was an outsider in the only family I had. So I got up, left that restaurant, and blocked their numbers forever. They thought I was a nobody with a boring desk job. They had no idea that my boring desk job was to hunt men just like my father, and that he had just walked directly into my line of fire. To understand the chasm between the person my family saw and the person I actually was, you have to go back to the Christmas before it all fell apart. The air in my parents' house was thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon, a manufactured warmth that barely concealed the frost underneath. My sister Claire was holding court by the glittering tree, clutching a small velvet-lined box. Inside were the keys to a brand-new luxury sedan, a bonus for hitting a sales target at Jensen Innovations. As she talked loudly about a new acquisition for the company, I didn't just see the car. I saw the student loan I begged my father to co-sign, only to be told money was too tight. I saw the busted laptop I replaced myself by working double shifts at a campus coffee shop. I saw a decade of scraped-together savings and quiet sacrifices, all dismissed in a single shiny moment of favoritism. Once the applause for Claire died down, I cleared my throat, trying to find a small pocket of air in a room full of her success. "I have some news, too," I said, my voice sounding small. "I was selected for the Halcyon Fellowship in Forensic Data Analysis. It's a big deal in my field." My father, Richard, who had just been clapping Claire on the back, turned to me and gave me a placid, dismissive smile. He patted my head, a gesture he hadn't used since I was 8. "That's nice, honey. Arts and crafts. Good for you." Before the sting of his words could even land, Claire chimed in with a smirk, twisting the knife. "Does that come with a salary? Or is it just another one of your hobbies?" Now, contrast that memory with my reality. My real world wasn't a warm living room, but a cold, secure briefing room at the Global Financial Integrity Task Force headquarters. Here, I wasn't the disappointing daughter with a hobby. I was known only by my call sign, Oracle. In that room, my director, Evans, stood before a massive screen displaying a complex web of transactions. "The syndicate has layered $500 million through 6 countries in 4 hours," he said, his voice tight. "The FBI is blind. The treasury is spinning its wheels. What do you see, Oracle? All eyes turned to me. I wasn't Anna, the family footnote. I was the last resort. I stood up and pointed to a single, almost invisible digital marker in the chaos. They made a mistake, I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension in the room. It's a rookie mistake, but they were moving too fast. They used an encrypted server provider with a physical subsidiary in a signatory nation. A murmur went through the room. I continued, we have a legal access point through Dublin. We can see their entire back end. I zoomed in on the screen, isolating a single corporate entity. The name glowed in the dark room, stark and undeniable. The linchpin for their new U.S. laundering operation is this company. The logo was my father's. Jensen Innovations. The room was dead silent, but this time it wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of awe. I showed no emotion. It was just another piece of data, another knot to be untangled. This duality was a life I had been conditioned to live, thanks in no small part to my mother. I remember her call just before that disastrous anniversary dinner. I have to introduce you to my mother, Eleanor, a woman who treated family peace like a fragile glass sculpture that had to be protected at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing one of her own children to do it. Anna, please, she'd whispered into the phone, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle panic. Just try to be cheerful tonight. You know how your father is. He and Claire have worked so hard to build his legacy. I stayed silent, and she filled the space with a sigh. He just doesn't understand your path, dear. It's easier for everyone if you just play along. It was the same speech I'd heard 100 times. The family mantra. Bend so you don't break us. Make yourself smaller so we can feel bigger. Play along. For years I had played the part of the quiet, aimless daughter because it was easier. It kept the peace. But hearing my mother's tired excuses, knowing I was about to walk into yet another performance, something inside me began to harden. The internal ledger I'd been keeping my whole life, every ignored achievement, every belittling nickname, every time I was told to just be quiet, was finally full. The debt was about to be called. For years, I let them define me. The quiet one. The disappointment. But in my world, silence isn't weakness. It's where I listen for the mistakes criminals make. My family had made the mistake of thinking I was still playing their game. It was time to show them I was the one who wrote the rules. That night, I didn't go home to my quiet apartment. The familiar sting of my father's dismissal and my sister's cruelty didn't curdle into tears or rage. Instead, as I walked through the silent city streets, the heat of that lifelong injustice cooled into something else entirely, something clear, sharp, and intensely focused. I went to my office. Under the cold, humming lights of the GFITF building, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an analyst, and my family's company, Jensen Innovations, had just tripped a wire in my most sensitive ongoing investigation. Codename Project Nightingale. My personal feelings were now irrelevant. This was no longer about revenge. It was about executing my mandate. Work was methodical, almost peaceful. My clearance gave me access to shadows the rest of the world never knew existed. I pulled satellite corporate registry data from the Isle of Man and cross-referenced encrypted banking records from the Cayman Islands. For hours, I followed the digital breadcrumbs. And then I found it. The key that unlocked everything. It was a digital signature on the acquisition paperwork that had linked my family's company to the criminal syndicate. The signature wasn't my father's. It was Claire's. She had signed off on the deal, likely out of sheer, blinding incompetence and a desperate need to impress our father. The evidence wasn't just compelling. It was irrefutable. The next morning, I stood before Director Evans in his office. My report was on his desk, a neat stack of paper detailing a web of corruption that now led directly to my family's front door. I never mentioned the name Jensen was mine. I was Oracle, presenting objective facts. Director, I began, my voice even. Project Nightingale's primary target is using Jensen Innovations to repatriate illicit funds. The commingling of assets is extensive. I pointed to a specific clause in my report. I recommend immediate activation of Asset Forfeiture Protocol 7, which allows for a provisional freeze of all domestic and international assets pending a full investigation. Director Evans read my analysis, his eyes scanning each line with practiced scrutiny. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "This is airtight, Oracle," he said, his voice low. He held my gaze for a moment, a silent question passing between us. He wasn't just confirming my data, he was asking if I understood the magnitude of what I had just set in motion. He leaned forward slightly. "Are you ready to pull the trigger?" I didn't hesitate. I met his gaze and gave a single firm nod. "I am." Warrants were served through Hague. Notices were sent to 3 different federal agencies. Claire wanted to impress Dad by playing in the big leagues. She had no idea the game was already over, and the referee was the daughter she'd just disowned. The reckoning didn't happen in a public square, but in the sterile, airless conference room at the heart of Jensen Innovations. I watched it all unfold from my own command center, a silent observer on a secure, multi-jurisdictional video feed. The room was a monument to my father's ego. A ridiculously long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, chairs that cost more than my first car, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city he thought he owned. In that reflection, I could see my father, Richard, and my sister Claire, looking small and pale. Their expensive suits seemed like ill-fitting costumes, and their high-priced lawyers shuffled papers with a sense of theatrical helplessness. Standing silently against the far wall were 2 federal agents, their presence a quiet, immovable fact that drained all the power from the room. My family was trapped inside their own monument, and they hadn't even realized it yet. On the large screen at the head of the table, the face of my boss, Director Evans, appeared. He looked calm, almost bored, which I knew was a tactic he used to project absolute authority. "Mr. Jensen, Ms. Jensen," he began, his voice crisp and devoid of any warmth. "As you have been notified, all domestic and international assets of Jensen Innovations have been provisionally frozen due to credible verified links to a global money laundering syndicate." My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound shockingly loud in the tense silence. "This is outrageous, a mistake. Our lawyers will—" It was the same booming voice he used to dismiss my dreams, the same tone he used to declare that his opinion was fact. He always believed volume equals authority. Evans cut him off with a simple, quiet sentence that was more powerful than all my father's shouting. "Your lawyers are welcome to try." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "But you need to understand that this investigation and the executive order to seize your assets was not generated by a committee. It comes from the analysis and recommendation of one individual, the world's leading expert on this particular syndicate's financial architecture." A flicker of confusion crossed my father's face. He was a man who dealt with figureheads and executives. The idea of a single, faceless expert holding this much power was completely alien to him. He was losing control, and his panic was beginning to show. Claire, ever the golden child, let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. The sound was brittle, fragile. "An expert? You've frozen our company based on the opinion of some nerd in a basement somewhere? We'll sue them for defamation in the next century." My father, emboldened by her misplaced bravado, pointed a shaking finger at the screen. He was desperate now, trying to find a person he could confront, a throat he could metaphorically choke. "I want to know who is responsible for this. I want a name." Director Evans looked down at his notes for a moment, a small, calculated piece of theater. Then he looked back up, his eyes cold and direct. "Very well, Mr. Jensen," he said slowly. "The lead analyst, whose findings were so compelling they triggered a multinational seizure action, operates under the call sign Oracle. As you are the primary subjects of this seizure, international protocol allows for their formal identification at this stage." He turned his head slightly, as if looking at someone just off his own screen. It was my cue. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a strange, profound stillness settle over me. "Oracle," Director Evans commanded, his voice echoing in their silent room. "Please activate your camera." With a single click of my mouse, my face appeared on a secondary screen right next to his. There was no sound, just the shattering of 2 worlds. My father's face, already pale, turned a waxy, translucent white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He physically stumbled backward, his hand clutching his chest as if he'd been struck. It was the face of a man seeing a ghost and a god at the same time, the face of a man whose entire reality had just been ripped apart at the seams. For his whole life, he had looked right through me. Now he couldn't look away. Claire just stared, her arrogant smirk frozen and then melting into a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. Her breath came in a choked, silent gasp. The nerd in the basement, the hobbyist, the daughter who didn't belong, was me. For my entire life, my father had been the one with all the power in the room. In that one moment, Watching him crumble on a video screen, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the quiet, final click of a lock turning, a door closing forever. I clicked the button, and the video feed from their conference room vanished. The screen went black, plunging my own command center into a sudden, profound silence. The drama was over. The yelling, the shock, the final shattering moment of recognition, it was all just a memory now, an echo in a room thousands of miles away. But my work wasn't done. The network my family had so carelessly entangled themselves in was still active, its tentacles still wrapped around global markets. I took a deep, steadying breath, the first one that felt truly mine, and turned back to the wall of monitors. The web of data was still there, waiting for me. It didn't care about my history or my pain. It only cared about the truth. A moment later, Director Evan's voice came through my headset, calm and professional. "Good work, Oracle." That was it. No questions about how I was feeling, no mention of the personal cataclysm I had just triggered. It was a simple acknowledgement of a job well done, and in that moment, it was the only validation I needed. My team began to gather around my console, their faces etched not with pity, but with a kind of quiet, professional awe. They didn't ask about my father's collapse or my sister's horrified expression. They asked about the mission. Their questions were about asset tracing and server vulnerabilities. On the main map, the icon for Jensen Innovations was just another node, a piece of a much larger puzzle that we now had to methodically break apart. It was no longer a legacy or a burden. It was simply a target. 1 year later, I stood at the head of another conference room table. This one was government-issue steel and laminate, not polished mahogany. A simple plaque on the door read, "Anna Jensen, Chief, Special Investigations Division." I had been promoted. My team, a mix of seasoned analysts and brilliant young recruits, watched me with focused attention. I spoke quietly, never needing to raise my voice to hold their respect. I was outlining our next operation, pointing to weak points in a powerful new syndicate's firewall. This was my domain now. This was my authority, earned not through a name or inheritance, but through results, through competence, and through the quiet, relentless pursuit of facts. That feeling of belonging extended beyond the office walls. The next evening, I was with my team at a small, noisy cafe downtown, celebrating a recent victory. We were laughing, arguing about the best way to crack a new encryption standard, and sketching out theories on napkins. The conversation was a whirlwind of ideas, shared purpose, mutual intellectual respect. No one was performing for a patriarch. No one was jockeying for position. We were a unit, a real one. Looking at their faces, I realized this was the family I had been searching for my whole life. A family forged not by blood and obligation, but by trust and a shared mission. I wasn't an outsider here. I belonged. Later that week, I was at home, standing by the window of my apartment and looking out at the city lights. It was peaceful. My phone buzzed on the counter with an email notification. The subject line was just 2 words, "Please, Anna." It was from my mother. My finger hesitated for only a second before I opened it. It was a long, rambling plea, a tapestry of guilt and desperation. The company was gone, liquidated to pay fines. My father was a shell of a man who rarely spoke. Claire was facing a federal indictment and years in prison. My mother begged me to use my connections to make it all stop, to undo what I had done, to put their broken world back together. I read her words and I felt nothing. The old sting was gone. The anger was gone. The familiar ache of disappointment had finally faded into a calm, gray stillness. Her world wasn't my world anymore. Her problems were not my problems to solve. I moved my cursor over the screen. It hovered over the delete button, then over reply. I clicked neither. Instead, I moved the message to my archives, a record of the past, filed away, but no longer a part of my present. I closed the laptop and turned back to the window, to the lights of the city that I now helped protect. Their chapter was closed. My sister told me I didn't belong with them. In the end, she was right. Their legacy was built on a foundation of lies, but mine was built on a foundation of truth. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.